And DC vs. Vampires issue 3, 4, and 5 are written by James Tynion IV and Matthew Rosenberg. Art by Otto Schmidt with Simone DeMeo coming on for issue 5, and letters by Tom Napolitano. And our story picks up with the Justice League having found Barry's body when Hal begins to make instructions for the Justice League to locate all of Barry's enemies, but Batman refuses his instruction before it can even be given as he continues to select samples from the crime scene. When Batman turns over and sees Jaina standing alone. Back in Gotham, Batgirl stops what she thinks is Ratcatcher robbing someone, but in fact, he was fending off a vampire. The two tussle for a moment before Nightwing stakes the vampire, where they then have a flirtatious moment which Ratcatcher scoffs at. Meanwhile, in the sewers, Batman is approached by Jaina, who just knows that Batman is looking for Zan, of which she also knows he's not alive. The book then cuts to the Penguin on the run from vampires himself when he runs into Zatanna, who at first he offers money to save him, but she is then revealed to be a vampire. We then pick up with Wonder Woman at Barry's crime scene when Hal comes down to try and comfort her. It's then that Wonder Woman notes how Hal seems to be so readily accepting of Barry's death and uses the lasso to force the truth out of him as he reveals he is indeed a vampire and in fact reveals that he also has the power of hypnosis as he digs his fangs into Wonder Woman's neck. Meanwhile, Damian comes across Black Canary and the Penguin's body, both suspecting of each other being vampires, and end up fighting, with Damian gaining the upper hand until Black Canary stabs him with a syringe and steals his blood, before kicking him in the face and fleeing. Back with Batman, he indeed manages to recover one small piece of Zan, and with Jaina angry and wanting to know who did this. Batman's only clue is the weapon used was made of light. Sometime later, Black Canary heads to an abandoned truck stop, which is being used by her, Red Arrow, and Green Arrow, as she gives him multiple syringes so they can continue to test who their allies are. Around this time, at the Hall of Justice, the Justice League are still discussing who may have killed Barry, when Wonder Woman and Green Lantern walk in, claiming it was Batman, leaving the entire league shocked. The story then shifts to London when Zatanna meets up with Constantine, who's enjoying just sitting there when she presses that she needs to talk to him about something in private. He agrees to go with her, but places a spell on her right quick, revealing he knows that she is a vampire, which leads to him then releasing her as he sits down to enjoy a drink, and the conversation about her new vampiric nature. We return with Bruce, who senses he's not alone and shuts off all the lights when an arrow strikes his cowl. Bruce then sneaks up behind Green Arrow, who realized that he actually shot a dummy, and says to himself, "Oh, this is bad." Back with Batgirl in Old Gotham, she heads to a building and finds some dirt under a bed, when Nightwing once again shows up and the two discuss the dirt, with Batgirl concluding it's the ancestral dirt of Mary, Queen of Blood, and they now need to discover why she was in Gotham. Meanwhile, the fight with Bruce and Green Arrow goes a bit back and forth, with Bruce getting splashed with holy water, and then Bruce trying to stake Green Arrow through the heart. They quickly realize that both believes each other to be a vampire, and they then cease fighting, where we then catch back up with Constantine and Zatanna, as Dr. Fate appears, and Zatanna leaps at the sorcerer, to which Constantine restricts her movement once more, and then Dr. Fate kills her. Constantine is angry at this, but Dr. Fate says the world is at stake, to which Constantine retorts, "When isn't it?" Bruce and Oliver at this time are now talking about who killed Barry. Ollie suggests they go after the vampires, but Bruce doesn't think that's wise because vampires adhere to a social hierarchy and they need to find the king. It's during these comments we find Red Hood taking out a vampire with Cassandra Cain, Batgirl, and the two are then attacked by the vampiric gorilla Grodd. Red Hood does his best to fight him off, but it's Cassandra who lands the blow behind Grodd, forcing him to turn into a bat and flee. And it's after helping Red Hood up that Cassandra shows him that she found a Joker card. It's after this sequence we return to the Batcave once more as Batman's alarms go off and the two get ready as Wonder Woman enters the cave along with Hal. Batman ascertains that she too has been turned, and a fight commences, which leads to the other Justice League members entering. Superman and the others are convinced of Batman's guilt, thinking he's just sick, to which Batman does the only thing he can, and that's fight, starting Batman and Green Arrow versus the Justice League. We quickly cut to a warehouse where Task Force X, otherwise known as the Suicide Squad, bursts in, finding the place completely empty. We shift back to the battle with Batman and Green Arrow holding their own against the more powerful heroes, with Batman even using a hidden kryptonite capsule in his mouth to blow kryptonite gas on Superman, knocking him out. The story then briefly shifts back to the Suicide Squad, determining that the Joker is a vampire, with Deadshot's attempt to brief Waller, who tells him that the mission stands on capturing the Joker. Suddenly, King Shark reveals he too is a vampire and eats Black Spider. They begin to fire, with Deadshot giving Harley and Parasite orders when it's revealed that both Parasite and Savant are also compromised. Back in the Batcave, the battle with the Justice League is then halted, as Cyborg attempts to establish a dialogue with Batman, and Batman then accuses Hal and Wonder Woman of being vampires. Cyborg, however, doesn't believe him, but Batman tells him to look at his evidence, which ends up shocking and taking Cyborg out along with all of the power in Gotham. Green Lantern then lights up the cave, but is then hit with tons of yellow powder, which gives Green Arrow enough time to shoot. However, he deliberately misses in fear of Batman being wrong, to which Batman even says he doesn't make mistakes. Batman then takes this time to get a little bit of fire and use against Martian Manhunter, forcing him into a teleporter and transporting him away. This, however, is a small reprieve as Hawkgirl attacks, forcing Green Arrow to shoot one of her wings. It's here then we have another brief page with Batgirl saving Harley Quinn, and then we return back to Batman and the Green Arrow fighting Wonder Woman. They do their best with Batman managing to hit Wonder Woman with holy water, revealing to Hawkgirl that she is indeed a vampire. Wonder Woman quickly grabs her and bites, then Batman uses this opportunity to try and stake her, but he was unable to generate enough force. Both Tim Drake and Damian then enter, hitting their bike into Wonder Woman, of which Green Arrow then hits her with an explosive arrow, giving them time to flee. And it's as they exit the manor that Bruce blows it up, of which, through the rubble, only Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, and Superman remain, with Wonder Woman and Green Lantern now looking down at their next potential vampire ally. And I will say, it will be interesting to see if Superman can even be turned into a vampire, what with the whole solar-powered powers thing. I mean, heck, the last time that a vampire tried to turn Superman into a vampire, he kind of exploded. And if you want more on that story, you can click right up here. And hot damn, whew, boy, let me tell you something. This story was a lot to unpack. And not just because I read 3 issues back to back, but each individual issue just had a lot going on. And it's interesting because throughout reading these books, I am catching myself in a very weird position where on one hand, I'm actually really enjoying the story as it is, but on the other hand, there are some minor details that are just a little hard to ignore. Like I already said via my review of issue number 2, that the whole thing of Barry not being able to vibrate through Green Lantern's construct just didn't really work for me because we've already seen that he is capable of doing that, and if he's powered up enough with the Speed Force, he can actually break through Green Lantern's constructs. And as I've read through these next 3 issues, I've come to understand that my suspension of disbelief might have to be stretched pretty wide. But let's start with the positives, because there were a lot of positives with these books. I think the story definitely builds off its tension very well, because there's that whole thing of, a secret invasion of vampires, or really any story like this where you're not really sure who exactly you can trust. And I think that level of uncertainty does create some very interesting drama. I think the action sequences are very top-notch. The fight between Batman and Green Arrow and the Justice League was definitely the highlight, specifically of issue number 5. And I do like a lot of the character interactions in this book, particularly the sequence of when Green Arrow first attacked Bruce, and then Bruce and Green Arrow were then fighting, and I don't know why, but it kind of reminded me of that fight between Keith David and Roddy Piper in the movie They Live. It's just a very interesting moment where they're both trying to kill each other through means of which you would typically kill a vampire, and it's after Bruce gets sprayed with holy water and Oliver realizes Bruce is trying to stake me, so obviously, you think that I'm the vampire, I think you're the vampire, and it did feel funny to me. And again, back to the whole Justice League fight, one aspect that I really liked about it was just showing how much of a tactician Batman really is, as even though he's caught off guard, he still has all these different contingencies. He can even think on the fly, you know? It's like, he's like, I gotta deal with the Martian Manhunter. Oh, there's now some fire in the Batcave, and he's able to utilize that in order to teleport Martian Manhunter away. I also really like the sequences between Constantine and Zatanna, because what's interesting about Constantine as a character, and I'm definitely seeing that here, is that he has basically seen it all in terms of, you know, demons and monsters and stuff like that. So him finding out that Zatanna is a vampire is basically just a Tuesday for him. And I like how after he gets over that initial attack on him, he just releases her immediately, sits down, and decides to have a drink. And it was in fact that he was actually mad at Dr. Fate for having killed Zatanna, because he said, vampire or not, she was my friend. And I also kind of think he was sort of, you know, poaching her for potential information. After all, he was asking her, hey, what's it like to be a vampire? So maybe he learned a few things that we will see end up getting utilized over the next several issues. There's, of course, the tease with the whole vampire Joker thing, and ever since Batman versus Dracula, where I saw an animated vampire Joker character, I'm like, yes, I love that concept. I would love to see it in this comic, especially since the Batman vs. Dracula movie, yeah, pushed the envelope as far as they could, but it was still a kid's movie, and I would love to see a fully unhinged, just completely like just menacing vampire Joker that is just gonna go on a killing spree. Now onto some criticisms, which aren't necessarily bad. They're just some things that kind of bugged me. One of those things was when Wonder Woman and Green Lantern came to the Hall of Justice, and Wonder Woman said, yeah, Batman killed Barry, and you know, the Justice League is shocked at the news and information, but then we see in the subsequent issue that they kind of just accept that, and I'm like, that's a pretty big claim to be taking effectively on somebody's word, no matter how trustworthy that word is, because they are the Justice League. They've dealt with things like that before, where there's been, you know, false information spread around and such, sometimes thinking, oh, this person betrayed us, and then turns out they really didn't. I mean, yeah, you could say, you know, when Cyborg's like, oh no, I've seen the evidence, we know you've turned against us, and I'm sitting there thinking to myself, what evidence are you talking about? We haven't seen this evidence. The audience hasn't been told about any evidence. Who made this evidence anyway? I mean, even Hal says, yeah, we know Batman can fabricate evidence, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, yeah, Batman could fabricate evidence, but who fabricated the evidence against Batman? So I think there was a very big breaking of the show don't tell rule here. I mean, the only other thing I can think of is maybe Cyborg was hypnotized by, you know, Green Lantern or Wonder Woman, and he fabricated the evidence himself. But if that was the case, you'd think he'd recognize his own digital fingerprints. And even so, I had to kind of wonder for a second, wait, is it possible that they've hypnotized now the entire Justice League into thinking Batman's guilty? Is that what's going on? But then I'm like, wait, Martian Manhunter is like a really powerful like sidekick and stuff, and I don't know if he could be hypnotized so easily. And in fact, Martian Manhunter's presence making me think that, wait, if, you know, Green Lantern and Wonder Woman are saying that Batman is the guilty party here, but then Batman is telling the Justice League the contrary, why didn't he just like read everybody's mind to see who was and was not telling the truth? And it just makes sequences like this kind of feel like a sort of because the plot demanded it sort of scenario. And when you have a 12-issue maxi series going on, I think you have enough time to kind of fill in the information in some of these areas. Also, when it comes to the Suicide Squad section in issue number 5, although I did enjoy the parts and sequences while they were on the page, I did feel like they detracted from the larger story that was going on, because you have this big battle that's going on between Batman, Green Arrow, and the Justice League, and we're constantly cutting back to the Suicide Squad, and at the very end of the issue, it honestly didn't really progress the story any further, with maybe the only exception showing us that Batgirl might be teaming up with the Suicide Squad. And with that contrasting art style, it almost kind of feels like this section of the story was meant to be its own individual tie-in rather than a main part of issue number 5. You know, one of those general scenarios where they were planning on making it a tie-in, and then the tie-in got canceled, and sort of like, well, we already have, you know, some of these pages made. And it's like, all right, let's just put it in issue number 5. Oh, and speaking of Batgirl, over the course of, these issues and such that she's been in, specifically with her interaction between her and Nightwing, there's definitely this flirtatious nature that's, a little less harmless for flirtatiousness and almost kind of feels like they are extremely horny. To a degree, there were a couple panels here and there where I'm like, I could have put the Hub logo in the corner. Even some of the positions she gets into within these books almost makes it look like she's begging for a dick to take her out to a nice dinner and have a respectable evening. When it comes to the art, I've kind of said my piece on it before, but over subsequent issues, I do feel like it's grown on me a lot. I like a lot of the animated style that it's kind of going for, and almost makes me wish we would get an animated adaptation of this story. Though there are some moments where I'm like, okay, some of these pages and panels look a little weird, like this one where Superman looks like Elvis who has a slight gap in his teeth. And I definitely gotta say that when Batman has his mask off, I don't know if it's intentional or not, but he kind of looks like Robert Pattinson to me. And then when it comes to issue number 5, even though I feel like the story didn't quite gel with what was going on in the main conflict of the book, I really do like the art here. It feels very anime-like. I love the vibrancy of the colors here. And if they did decide to make a tie-in Suicide Squad book to DC vs. Vampires, I would like that art style to be the one they use. Oh yeah, and that King Shark taking a bite out of Black Spider, nice. So yeah, almost at the halfway point, and with some slight criticisms here and there, I'm still not hating it. I think the character interactions are fun, I think the fights are fun, and they do tend to take my mind off some of the areas that, I would consider otherwise problematic. And if you want to know my thoughts on the other 2 installments of DC vs. Vampires, definitely click on the cards. And with that, I'm going to score DC vs. Vampires issue 3, 4, and 5 an 8 out of 10. So DC vs. Vampires issue 3, 4, and 5. What did you think about these books if you read them? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please leave your comments in the comment section below. And if you liked this video, I'd love it if you'd smash that like button, share it with some friends, subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and ring that notification bell for more comic book content. And if you're wondering what to watch next, consider one of these 2 videos. Alright, take care, have a great day, and as always, stay geeky.